Imagine a world where your choice of clothing could get you executed, a simple sneeze was considered a murder weapon, and winning a national sports tournament was a literal death sentence. That world was real, and it was called the Aztec Empire. We're about to present 32 pieces of historical evidence that prove they were the most brilliantly dumb civilization to ever exist. 1. We're all chasing that Hollywood smile, dropping serious cash on whitening strips and dentists who operate with the precision of jewelers. The Aztecs, however, had a far more rustic solution for oral hygiene. Their mouthwash of choice was pee. But this wasn't just any regular waste product. Oh no, they were connoisseurs. They would collect urine and let it age, fermenting it like a fine, horrifying wine until the ammonia concentration reached weapons-grade levels. They believed they were using advanced chemistry to kill germs, which, to be fair, the ammonia probably did. But they were also gargling a biohazard. The next time you complain about the aggressively minty flavor of your mouthwash, take a moment to be profoundly grateful that your morning routine doesn't involve uncorking a jug of vintage 1492. 2. If you think people overreact on the internet today, you should have seen the Aztecs during a solar eclipse. For them, it wasn't a neat astronomical phenomenon to be viewed through a pinhole projector. It was a 5-alarm cosmic horror film happening in real time. The prevailing theory was that a celestial monster was literally eating the sun, and this was likely the universe's closing credits. Absolute pandemonium would erupt. Pregnant women would lock themselves indoors, terrified that the unholy darkness would transform their unborn children into mice. Seriously, mice. And in a desperate plea to the universe's management, they'd ramp up the human sacrifices, believing a few extra hearts might persuade the sky monster to find a different snack. It was a nationwide, state-sanctioned freakout over basic orbital mechanics. 3. Imagine your boss forcing you to go to a multi-day company picnic where attendance is mandatory, and so is having a fantastic time. That was an Aztec religious festival. During their endless calendar of celebrations, which usually involve feasting, dancing, and watching priests perform open-heart surgery without anesthesia, it was a legal requirement for every single person to be visibly cheerful. Showing sadness, boredom, or even mild indifference was a grave insult to the gods. This was emotional totalitarianism with a smile. You're watching something profoundly gruesome, yet you have to maintain a grin of pure bliss, as if you've just won the lottery. It's the ultimate form of performance anxiety, where having a resting sad face could genuinely get you killed. 4. Forget pearly whites. The absolute pinnacle of Aztec dental fashion was a smile that looked like it belonged to a deep-sea predator. For the elite, having straight white teeth was boring. Instead, they'd have their teeth filed down into menacingly sharp points. But the makeover didn't stop there. A highly skilled artisan, essentially a proto-dentist with the soul of a jeweler, would then use a primitive drill to carve out small cavities in the enamel to inlay precious stones. Polished discs of jade, turquoise, or pyrite would be expertly set into their teeth, creating a smile that was both dazzlingly opulent and utterly terrifying. It was a bold aesthetic that perfectly communicated, "I am fabulously wealthy and I will not hesitate to bite you with my gem-encrusted fangs." 5. Modern childbirth often involves calming playlists, aromatherapy, and encouraging whispers. The Aztec approach was slightly different, in that they treated the delivery room like a combat zone. The midwife's primary role was not to soothe, but to scream. She would get right in the laboring mother's face and bellow ferocious war cries, essentially trying to intimidate the baby into making an appearance. The entire ordeal was framed as a glorious battle. The mother was a warrior, and her mission was to capture a new citizen for the empire. If she succeeded, she was a hero. If she died in the attempt, she was given the funeral of a fallen soldier. It's the only culture in history where the appropriate response to contractions was to start shouting battle slogans. 6. This may be the most mind-bogglingly dumb fact in the history of all great civilizations. The Aztecs knew what a wheel was. They completely understood the physics and its potential. Archaeologists have confirmed this by unearthing their children's toys. Adorable little pull-along animals like dogs and jaguars, all equipped with perfectly functional wheels. So, what did these brilliant pyramid builders do with this revolutionary, world-changing technology? Did they build carts, wagons, chariots? Absolutely not. They reserved this incredible invention exclusively for toys. This led to the profoundly stupid spectacle of Aztec children happily rolling their wooden pets down the causeway, while their fathers were a few feet away, collectively groaning as they dragged a 10-ton block of stone on their backs. It's an act of willful inefficiency so profound it's almost impressive. 7. In our modern world, we call it a broken heart and treat it with ice cream and bad movies. In the Aztec Empire, it was a recognized and often fatal medical condition called tlasocemia. This was, in essence, a diagnosable death from overwhelming sadness or lovesickness. If a person suffered a severe emotional blow, such as the loss of a partner or a particularly harsh, romantic rejection, it was believed their heart could literally be shattered by the grief, causing them to physically waste away and die. Aztec physicians wouldn't just tell you to get back out there. They would treat you as a patient with a terminal illness. It was a world where being ghosted wasn't just emotionally devastating. It could genuinely land on your death certificate as the official cause. 8. According to the Aztec creation myth, the gods were essentially divine bakers who had a few disastrous failures before getting the recipe right. Their first attempt at making humans was out of mud, but this prototype had a fatal flaw. They dissolved in the rain, turning into a soggy mess. The second batch, made of wood, was more durable, but they were stiff, soulless, and generally stupid. So for their third and final attempt, the gods used the best ingredient available, maize dough. Yes, you heard that right. Humanity, in its final, glorious form, is a sentient corn product. We are, at our core, walking, talking, thinking tortillas. This honestly explains everything, especially our deep-seated love for chips. It's not just a snack, it's a way of reconnecting with our doughy ancestors. 9. In many cultures, having a few too many drinks might earn you a stern lecture or a killer hangover. In the Aztec Empire, however, the Department of Public Intoxication had exactly one disciplinary tool: a brutal public execution. For the average citizen, there was no 3 strikes policy. It was strictly 1 strike, and you're out. If you were caught drunk in public for the very first time, the standard punishment was being stoned or beaten to death by a crowd. It was the ultimate zero-tolerance policy. No excuses, no, it was my birthday, just a swift and messy end. The nobility, of course, played by different rules. Their first offense might just result in having their house publicly demolished and being stripped of all titles. It's a society where your biggest worry after a night out wasn't a hangover, but a lynch mob. 10. We've already seen how wearing the wrong type of cloth could be a death sentence, but the Aztec fashion police's jurisdiction didn't end at your shirt. It extended all the way to your feet. Sandals, known as cacti, were meticulously regulated by the social hierarchy. The emperor himself sported sandals made of pure gold, adorned with jaguar skins and precious gems. Lesser nobles had to settle for less flashy, but still exclusive versions. And the common folk? They made do with simple sandals woven from plant fibers. Or more often, just the dirt on their own 2 feet. If a peasant was caught wearing footwear that was deemed too fancy for his station, it was considered an act of high treason. The penalty was, predictably, death. It was a world where choosing the wrong shoes in the morning could genuinely be your last decision. 11. We all know that one couple that breaks up and gets back together every other week. The Aztecs saw this romantic indecisiveness not as a personal drama, but as a crime against social order that required the ultimate punishment. Getting a divorce was perfectly legal and socially acceptable. However, if you and your ex-spouse later had second thoughts, reconciled, and decided to remarry each other, the state would intervene by having you both executed. No exceptions. It was the most brutally effective, we are never, ever getting back together policy ever devised by a government. In the Aztec world, sending a "you up" text to your ex was a mutual suicide pact. It certainly made you think very, very carefully before saying "I do" for the second time to the same person. 12. The Aztecs played a high-stakes ballgame called Olamalisli, and it was less of a sport and more of a stylish way to die. The ball was a 9-pound brick of solid rubber that moved with the speed and kinetic energy of a cannonball. Players had to hit this projectile through a high stone hoop using only their hips, knees, and elbows. Just getting struck by the ball could cause fatal internal bleeding. But the physical danger was only half of it. In a truly bizarre twist, the grand prize for the winning team's captain was often the honor of being immediately sacrificed to the gods. Let that sink in. You play a perfect game, you are the MVP, the hero of the day, and your reward is a priest ripping your heart out. It's a sport with literally no good outcome. You either lose, get maimed, or win and get ritually murdered. 13. Tenochtitlan was an engineering marvel, a sprawling metropolis built on a lake. But a city of 200,000 people surrounded by water presents a unique sanitation problem. The Aztec solution was both ingenious and profoundly weird. They invented the public toilet canoe. These were essentially floating outhouses. Men in canoes would paddle through the city's vast network of canals, operating as a mobile waste collection service. If nature called, you'd simply flag one down like a gondola, do your business, and they would paddle off. The collected human waste wasn't discarded, it was a hot commodity. It was sold to farmers on the mainland as premium fertilizer. The Aztecs didn't just invent a floating bathroom, they created a perfect, sustainable, closed-loop system of recycling poop for profit. 14. You think modern music festivals get a little strange? The Aztecs would find our idea of a wild time utterly quaint. Their preferred method of partying involved getting catastrophically high on poison scraped from the back of a toad. The cane toad secretes a powerful hallucinogenic bufatoxin from glands on its head, and the Aztecs were more than happy to partake. This wasn't some refined process. They would either lick the toad directly, a phrase that is as historically accurate as it is disgusting, or they would collect the venom, dry it, and smoke it. This was the original high-risk, high-reward psychedelic trip. You were essentially gambling with a painful, convulsive death for the chance to see some wild colors and maybe have a chat with the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl. 15. We think of smoothie bars with their wheatgrass and kale concoctions as a modern health craze, but the Aztecs were centuries ahead of us in the art of consuming green sludge. A staple of their diet was a substance called tecuitlatl, which alarmingly translates to stone excrement. In reality, it was spirulina, a nutrient-rich blue-green algae that formed a thick scum on the surface of their lakes. They would use fine nets to skim this protein-packed goo from the water, dry it in the sun to form greenish cakes, and then crumble it into their food. While it was an incredibly effective superfood, you have to salute the bravery of the first Aztec who looked at a slimy green pond and thought, "You know what? I'm going to make a casserole out of that." 16. Forget trendy names like Liam or Olivia. Aztec parents had a naming convention that sounded less like choosing a name for a child and more like generating a secure password. Many children were simply named after the day they were born on the 260-day ritual calendar. This system combined a number from 1 to 13 with one of 20 day signs, such as rabbit, flint, reed, or monkey. This resulted in an entire population of people walking around with names like 7 deer, 1 rabbit, and 12 lizard. Imagine trying to be a parent. For Flint, if you don't stop throwing rocks at your brother 2 monkey, there will be serious consequences. It created a society where your name was less a personal identity and more of a cosmic appointment reminder. 17. Picture this. You're a top Aztec general leading a perfectly trained army of thousands. Morale is high. The war paint is immaculate. You're poised on a hilltop, ready to descend upon an enemy city and collect a glorious haul of sacrificial prisoners. The tension is electric. Suddenly, a nearby owl hoots. And just like that, the entire invasion is off. You, the general, sigh and tell everyone to pack up and go home because a bird made a weird noise. This wasn't a one-time thing. Major military campaigns were frequently and abruptly canceled due to bad omens, like an owl hooting or a deer crossing the path. Imagine the absolute confusion of the enemy army, watching thousands of terrifying warriors just turn around and leave because the universe's vibe was off. Aztec warfare was less about strategy and more about cosmic permission slips. 18. In the Aztec military, climbing the career ladder had a very specific and violent first step. To transition from a faceless commoner soldier to a respected warrior with status and privileges, you had one job. You had to capture an enemy combatant alive. Killing the enemy was fine, even encouraged, but it earned you no professional credit. The Empire ran on a constant supply of living sacrifices, so a dead enemy was a wasted resource. This turned battles into a bizarre, high-stakes version of Capture the Flag, where warriors were often more focused on wrestling their opponents into submission than on winning the actual war. Your annual performance review was conducted on the battlefield, where success meant a promotion and a fancy new uniform, and failure meant you were about to become someone else's promotion. 19. We all have that one neighbor who's a little too passionate about where their property line is. The Aztecs took this concept and cranked it up to a terrifying extreme. Their property laws were brutally simple. If you were caught moving the stone marker or boundary post that separated your land from your neighbors, the punishment was death. There was no trial, no fines, no, let's talk this out. You fudge the property line by a single inch, and you forfeit your right to exist. It's the most effective get-off-my-lawn policy in human history. It must have created an unbelievably tense social dynamic. Greetings, neighbor. Lovely harvest this year. By the way, if you touch that rock, my children will be fertilizing their crops with your ashes. Now, can I borrow a cup of maize? 20. The Aztec legal system had the strangest relationship with alcohol. If you were a young person and got caught publicly intoxicated, you faced head shaving, public humiliation, or even a brutal death. However, if you managed to navigate their deadly sports, poisonous recreational drugs, and omen-obsessed generals to reach the grand old age of 70, you unlocked a golden years perk. The law stated that anyone over 70 had earned the unrestricted, government-sanctioned right to get completely and utterly hammered in public whenever they pleased. It was the ultimate retirement plan. You were officially declared a national treasure who could no longer be held accountable for your drunken shenanigans. It was a society that demanded total sobriety for 70 years, followed by a decade of state-sponsored partying. 21. Every great civilization thinks it's the center of the world, but the Aztecs took this belief to a level of cosmic certainty that is almost admirable. They didn't just see their capital, Tenochtitlan, as the heart of their empire. They believed it was the literal center of the entire universe, the Axis Mundi. This was the sacred point where the heavens, the earth, and the underworld intersected. Their great temple, the Templo Mayor, wasn't just a place of worship. It was the cosmic engine that kept the sun rising and the universe from collapsing. This worldview meant that every other city and culture on the planet was just a minor character in their grand cosmic drama. It's a level of self-importance that makes even the proudest New Yorker seem positively humble by comparison. 22. Forget Catholic guilt. The Aztecs had a far more efficient, if bizarre, system for dealing with sin. They worshipped a goddess named Tlazolteotl, whose divine specialty was, and I am not making this up, literally eating your sins. This wasn't a metaphor. Once, and only once, in your entire lifetime, you could go to her priest and confess every single wicked, immoral, and depraved act you had ever committed. The goddess would then spiritually devour all your moral filth, leaving you completely pure. It was a one-time-only, all-you-can-sin buffet. You had to strategically save up a lifetime of transgressions for one massive, soul-purifying confession. It's the ultimate spiritual loophole. Live a life of unchecked debauchery, then have it all eaten away in one divine meal. 23. In the Aztec Empire, the fashion police didn't write tickets, they wrote death sentences. Their society was so rigidly stratified that clothing was not a form of self-expression, but a strict uniform dictated by your social class. The most critical rule governed the use of cotton. Only the nobility and high-ranking officials were permitted to wear garments made from the soft, comfortable fiber. If you were a commoner, you were legally confined to scratchy, rough textiles made from maguey cactus fibers. If a peasant dared to wear a comfy cotton loincloth, it was considered an act of rebellion against the natural order, and the punishment was immediate execution. It was a society where being too comfortable was a capital crime, taking the concept of dress for success to its most lethal conclusion. 24. If you thought your awkward teenage haircut was bad, be thankful you weren't a student in the Aztec Empire. Young men from commoner families who attended the Tenochtitlan schools were subjected to a mandatory government-issued haircut specifically designed to be as unflattering as humanly possible. The style consisted of a bizarrely long patch of hair grown from the nape of the neck, while the rest of the head was kept shaved. The entire point of this hideous haircut was to systematically destroy any sense of vanity or pride in one's appearance before it could take root. It was a state-sponsored program to ensure an entire generation of young men looked like they had been in a fight with a wild animal. It was a unique form of social control that began by making sure nobody could ever feel too good about themselves. 25. In our world, sneezing in a quiet room is just a minor social embarrassment. In the Aztec Empire, it was a supernatural death warrant. If you were visiting a sick person and happened to let out a sneeze, it was interpreted as a direct, non-negotiable message from the gods that the sick person was doomed. There was no bless you. It was more like you had just announced their celestial expiration date. Imagine the immense pressure of that situation. You're trying to be a comforting presence at your friend's bedside, and you feel that telltale tickle in your sinuses. You would do anything to suppress it, because being the person who literally sneezed your friend into the underworld is a heavy burden to carry. It's the ultimate example of social anxiety having lethal consequences. 26. Today, we go to great lengths to achieve perfect vision and straight eyes. The Aztecs, however, had a completely different set of beauty standards. In their culture, being cross-eyed was considered incredibly attractive and a sign of nobility. It was so desirable, in fact, that parents would actively try to induce the condition in their children. They would dangle small beads or ornaments between their infants' eyes, encouraging them to focus inward until their eye muscles were permanently misaligned. It's a world where the ability to stare at your own nose was the height of fashion. Every formal gathering must have been a bewildering spectacle, with the most beautiful people in the room all looking in slightly different directions at once. It was a beauty trend that came with a built-in headache. 27. The Aztecs had a deeply confusing relationship with the axolotl, the bizarre, perpetually smiling salamander native to their lakes. On one hand, the creature was sacred. According to their mythology, the god Xolotl transformed himself into an axolotl to escape being sacrificed by his fellow gods. Therefore, this little amphibian was literally a deity in disguise. On the other hand, they thought it was delicious. Axolotls were a common food source, often roasted and served with maize. This created an incredible cognitive dissonance where you could be eating an animal that you simultaneously worshipped as a divine being. It's like believing in the divinity of Jesus, but also thinking he'd be fantastic with a side of guacamole. It's a unique intersection of reverence and appetite. 28. The Aztec military wielded one of the most visually intimidating weapons in history, the macuahuitl. It was a heavy wooden club, almost like a paddle, but its edges were studded with razor-sharp shards of obsidian. In close combat, it was devastating, capable of inflicting horrific lacerations and even decapitating a horse with a single blow. It sounds like the perfect weapon, right? Well, it had one major design flaw. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It's incredibly sharp, but also extremely brittle. Against Spanish steel armor or even bone, the blades would often shatter on the first impact. This turned their legendary sword into a one-hit wonder. You got one terrifying, devastating swing, and then you were essentially holding a heavy, toothless club. It was a weapon that was both a masterpiece of death and a piece of disposable junk. 29. There were times when the Aztecs' demand for sacrificial victims outpaced the supply provided by regular warfare. Their solution to this logistical problem was the Flowery War, or Xochitlal. These were prearranged, ritualized battles fought between the Aztecs and their rival city-states. The primary objective wasn't to gain territory or strategic advantage. It was specifically to capture enemy warriors alive for future sacrificial ceremonies. It was war as a form of bloody ritualized sport, with both sides knowing the rules. Imagine a general's pre-battle speech. "All right, men. Our goal today is not conquest. We just need to meet our quota of 50 able-bodied prisoners for the upcoming festival. Try to capture them without causing too much damage. We want them looking their best for the sun god." 30. Most governments try to avoid causing mass panic among their citizens. The Aztecs, however, scheduled it on the official state calendar. Every 52 years, they performed the New Fire Ceremony, a ritual that was essentially a nationwide, government-mandated night of terror. They believed this was when one cosmic cycle ended, and the gods might simply choose not to start the next one, allowing star demons to descend and devour humanity. In preparation, every single fire in the empire was extinguished. People smashed their pottery, hid their children, and lived in absolute terrifying darkness, waiting to see if the priests could successfully light a new ceremonial fire in the chest of a sacrificial victim. It was the most stressful holiday imaginable, a night where the entire civilization collectively held its breath to see if the world would end. 31. Let's say you're an Aztec parent who has fallen on hard times. What's your solution? You could sell one of your children into slavery. It was a shockingly common and legally regulated practice. But here's the dumbest and most bizarre part of the system. It often came with a buyback clause. If your financial situation improved, you could go back to the person who bought your child and purchase them back, often at the original price. Furthermore, if your child was mistreated by their new owner, you could file a complaint. A successful complaint could result in your child being returned to you for free, and the abusive owner being enslaved as punishment. It's the most insane customer satisfaction policy in human history, applied to the practice of selling your own family members. 32. The Aztec pantheon was filled with powerful and terrifying deities, but the chief god, Tezcatlipoca, or Smoking Mirror, had a particularly strange fashion sense. This god of the night sky, destiny, and sorcery was often depicted with one of his feet missing, replaced by a polished obsidian mirror. Not a weapon, not a magical artifact, but a mirror. This raises so many logistical questions. How did he walk without shattering his divine prosthetic? Did he just limp through the heavens with the most stylish and least practical foot in the entire cosmos? It's a bold aesthetic choice for an all-powerful being, combining ultimate cosmic authority with the constant, nagging risk of stubbing your mirror foot on a cloud and suffering 7 eons of bad luck. It proves even gods aren't immune to questionable design choices. We've given you 32 exhibits of certified Aztec insanity, but we know this is just the tip of a very weird pyramid. The history of this empire is a bottomless well of bizarre decisions. So we have to ask, what is the single most unbelievable, dumb, or shocking Aztec fact that we were foolish enough to miss? Expose our oversight in the comments. And if you enjoy this kind of historical madness, sacrifice the like button and subscribe for more.